people on the at the meeting, and then jump into our meeting agenda. So I'll just go down my list. Demetra.
Demetra McBride, Bureau Chief, the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management for Arlington County.
Okay. Doug.
Hi, I'm Doug Snowenboss, Commission member and Chair of the Energy Committee.
Jenna.
Jenna Peabody, Air Team.
Joe.
Joe Trevette, member of the public.
Okay, Cindy.
Hi, Cindy Lewin, Commission member.
Mark.
Mark Greenwood, Commissioner.
Jonathan.
Jonathan Morgenstein, member of the Commission and member of the Energy Committee as well.
Okay, Paul.
I'm Paul Snodgrass, member of the public.
Okay, Rich Dooley.
Good evening, everybody. Rich Dooley with the Air Team.
Rob.
Hi, Rob Sandoli, Commissioner and virtual member of the Energy Committee.
Okay, and Trevor.
Hi, everyone. Trevor Montano, Arlington resident and aspiring member of the Commission.
Okay, great. Welcome. Is there anybody in the public that wants to make public comment? Okay, take that as a no. Did we circulate the January minutes to everybody in advance? Maybe you can bring them up.
I just received the edits back, so I can share them right now.
Okay. You want to make that a little bigger?
Want to do this now or just do it the next time?
Maybe we can do it the next time if you can just share with the commission. And we'll just do January and February.
Okay, will do.
Okay. And just let people know is that Susan had another engagement this evening, so she'll be joining us at 8 o'clock. So we're going to shift the agenda a little bit. And start out with a budget discussion and update on the CEP roadmap. So I think turn it over to you, Demetra, and however you want to.
Okay, great. I apologize, everyone. I'm a little raspy and a little under the weather today. I first wanted to ask if anyone has any specific questions about the budget. There was a presentation. For those of you, I know Joan was there, but on Saturday there was the first introduction of the manager's proposed budget, and there were some overarching comments. I know that the budget has been posted for several days now. I don't know whether anybody has had a chance to look through it at all, so I just wanted to open it up first to anybody who had any specific questions.
Yeah, I had a quick question, Demetra, and I have not looked at the materials. And if this is a number that you know off the top of your head you can find easily, great. If not, that's okay. But is there like a number that can be said to the public, like this is how much Arlington proposed to spend on public EV charging in fiscal 2025?
Yes and no. The answer is yes. You may have to wait for it, Doug, because that money is considered a capital cost. So it's going to come up in the CIP and PAYGO. I can tell you that there are two separate allocations that have been put into the proposal for the draft PAYGO and CIP. One is from facilities, and that is for EVSE that will serve government fleets. And then there's the one with air, which goes towards public access, public use EVSE on government facilities.
I had thought last year, at least, they put in what was being, what was being covered for EV chargers this year, at least what was covered out of the CEP implementation fund.
Yeah, there's 2-year projections or 2 or 3 year projections, Joan, but each year we confirm the number. And also, just to give you a heads up, there is, in addition to that, Doug, the county manager announced on Saturday that he is reallocating an additional $1 million towards the Climate Action Fund. We
Right.
were asked a couple of weeks ago to give a couple of us to put together a list, if we had funding for $1 million, what we would allocate that towards. We did do a list of tier 1 and tier 2 recommendations with tentative budgets. We did give them kind of ranking through between tier 1 and tier 2 in total. The entire list came to almost 2 million. I cannot tell you what is on either tier right now because I'm waiting for confirmation from DMF and the manager's office, whether or not they've accepted the tier 1 proposal or are making tweaks to it. I can tell you, you will know that shortly. I think you should start having that information. I would be surprised if the decision isn't made and it's not in detail in the March, is it 12th or 13th? I think it's
March 12th.
12th, is the DES budget workshop.
Can I just follow up real quick? I mean,
Sure.
So when I'm talking to friends, acquaintances, members of the public, whatever, and I think the same way for the other members of C2E2, it would be so nice if we could say, you know, we're all excited about what Arlington County is doing for public EV charging. The county manager's budget proposes to spend X dollars in fiscal year 2025 to set up public charging on county-owned parking lots. You know, and whether X is 250,000, 500,000, 750,000, I don't know. I have no idea how much these things cost or how much is allocated toward that. But to me, that would just be a really nice shorthand way when I'm talking to people and other people here talk to people, say, yeah, they're going to spend 500,000 on public EV charging. Isn't that great? But we need that number in order to be able to say that. So
Yes,
if there was a way to
and
to
you will
do
have that number. It's just that the operating budget is on a different schedule than the capital budget is. The operating budget, the manager gave his, announcement of his proposed budget. There's going to be a period. There'll be, I think, 10 budget workshops. There's going to be 2 public hearings. The operations budget will be approved probably in April. And the
Doesn't
last
annual spending get rolled into the operational budget as well?
No, because you have CIP money and PAYGO money set aside for the capital budget. It's a little bit different than the stormwater budget because stormwater is an enterprise fund. Even though there are 2 separate budgets, and you will see a separate operational stormwater budget that is approved in late April, and typically the draft capital budget, it's staggered. It generally, the manager's recommendation comes out, I would say, in April, and it's approved in June. So you will have that specificity, Doug. It's just that they don't happen they don't happen simultaneously.
So we need to wait till the capital budget comes out in April.
Yes.
Bottom line.
Sorry about that, but
no, I'm just trying to help the county and its
no,
messaging.
I understand.
Its messaging efforts. This is where we can amplify the message, I think, if we have an opportunity.
And Doug, just for clarification, the Climate Action Fund is part of the operating budget, so that will be part of the budget workshops in March.
And compared to, or just taking from last year, as they did have those expenditures for EV charging that was expected for installation at, and I shared the slides from last year's DES presentation in the email I sent out the other day, which at least gives a sense of how the CEP implementation fund was planned to be expended, both in FY23, which was the first year, and then in this this current FY24 budget.
Yes, and
Demetra, can you walk through some of the highlights on the budget related to our issues?
Right now, what I can see is, again, I'm kind of a little bit constrained between now and the 13th of March to keep to the parameters of the manager's budget. If you saw that, there's one thing that I do want to draw your attention to early. If you look at DES in that section, there is a line item budget at the head of each department section that courses over a number of years. So it starts, I believe, in FY22, and it goes through a projection to FY26. You will see what looks on its face like a decrease in the air budget from FY24 to 25, when in actuality, there's actually an increase in the budget, and I'll tell you how. FY24 had significant one-time funding to complete the ArtBus ZEV feasibility study, as well as the carbon neutral transportation master plan, which will be completed before the end of the fiscal year, along with the 5-year action and implementation plan for that. So those funds were significant between the two initiatives, and they will be fully expended in FY24. So you're going to see roughly $100,000, what looks like $100,000 cut. That really isn't a cut. It's additional one-time funding to, take care of what we anticipate to be additional needs. Those additional needs roughly are going to be in some implementation. It's going to be dedicated, part of it, towards federal grants, and to the extent that we have matches in some grants, and to the extent that we also have interim costs in bridging the gap between running all of the federal grant application activities between that and actually getting grant awards. So you'll see those coming out. I would also draw your attention to allocations that are in other DES departments. You're going to see allocations in the Equipment Bureau, and this is really, you're going to see it more in the capital budgets, but that's where you're going to find in facilities and air will have the EVSA. The Equipment Bureau will have the additional purchase of EV vehicles for the government fleet, as well as the school bus purchases. And that's the delta between what is available for the grants and what the remaining funds are to cover the cost. You're also going to see in facilities, again, in the capital budgets mainly, you're going to see all of the funding that you're used to seeing for the upgrades to the government facilities, including electrification of systems and appliances. And I would propose that you also look at the Arlington County Consumer Survey, because in our mind, just about everything they do has a greenhouse gas reduction implication and impact. And ACCS really controls, oh my gosh, he is just precious. Look at that face. Hi, baby. Getting back to
is that
ACCS,
in the budget or is that somewhere different?
Joan, let me clarify because I'm not sure. Rich, do you have any clarity on how they split up their budget between operating and capital on their programs at ACCS? This is the department, or this is the division, a part of transportation that deals mainly with micromobility.
Okay.
No, I don't have any further insights, Demetra, sorry.
Okay, so let me get together
So
with
that
them.
comes under the mobility lab.
Yes.
And they've just got that fairly sizable grant to help promote expansion of transit, use of transit and other other mobility options.
Yes. And we're working with them to, I'm trying to embed them in grants like the regional CPRG, the climate pollution reduction grant, some elements in transportation to help supplement things that they're doing that cross-cut with what we're doing as well. So I've got an action item here, a note that I will go and speak to Jim later on this week and ask him what is the general description or defining criteria for what they allocate to their capital budgets and what they allocate towards operating.
Yeah, okay, because that, I knew they've got some funding there, but in getting some of that stuff laid out a little bit more clear would help, and that gets at some of the issues that we've raised kind of repeatedly is transparency of understanding how budget expenditures connect to meeting climate and other environmental goals.
It's something, Joan, that we may want to discuss a little bit more because I don't want to presume. I know what that defining line may be in my mind from one department to another and one division. But I think C2E2, as well as the Energy Committee, it would behoove us to have a collective conversation on how we define those things. Sometimes how you define something is really the chief indicator or radically defines what your success is actually. So
yeah, I can offer some of the observations on the budget and then maybe kind of do a little bit of thinking, of what we're kind of looking for and expecting. But as Demetra mentioned, the air program expenditures largely flat from what it has been, given the little shift due to these studies coming under completion. But they are adding an additional $1 million to the CEP investment fund, especially for those that are relatively new. This was put in the FY23 budget, and they've spread out expenditures based on what was in last year's DES presentation. They would still have a little over 200,000 remaining. The funds that were spread over these two fiscal years was on energy efficiency projects, one of which I think the main one was on the Madison Center, which is supplementing other investment funds in renovating that facility. And they did indicate somewhere in the budget information that the building was moving towards an all-electric building. So I think but there are also still, and then the other expenditures, there was EV charging and also the CCA study. So that's how that money has been split. I think one of the questions is, does it make sense? From our perspective, I think in terms of continuity of funding, does it make sense to continue to make that a special fund rather than looking at those funds and making them line items for projects that would really help to advance? One of the areas that we've pushed for in the past few years is actually having some sort of kind of one-stop shop, outward facing programs that really engage the public. And where, so that but again, and even some of the other stuff, actually, they do seem to be, they have information on rooftop solar, which it looks like they finally broken the log jam of the problems that they were having, both contract wise and I also think supply chain wise. So, they're seeing a big increase in the amount of rooftop solar on county facilities now. So that's some progress. Again, they do have numbers there in terms of what progress they're making in EV chargers and installation. There's also, I mentioned the Madison Center, but they're also not really a lot of information on some of the other projects and not knowing what they are, what opportunities they might provide for actually both improving energy efficiency and particularly electrification of buildings. Kind of it just is not transparent and just remains a question of how the county is advancing on those goals. And then on the transportation side, the county is actually, they're planning to merge two art bus routes, and they're eliminating another one. These are some of those routes that are extremely underutilized, 2 to 3 people per hour on average, and using them and focusing mainly on those sections of those routes that get the most use and address those, addressing those areas where there's a higher demand and need for transportation. So again, I think to me that just mainly sends out a question of whether or not they're really, it really kind of signals the need to really look closer at art and maybe think about redesigning it, and thinking, being more flexible, on demand, microtransit, working more with APS to kind of think about how they can, make art more attractive for more people. And then what was the final thing? Oh, and the other thing is on other section in the Parks Recs, they're actually going to put close to $1 million in tree pruning and another about $300K in invasive removal. So I think that's pretty positive. I haven't looked any further on that budget, whether or not there's anything in there or whether there's any surprises that we might want to look at. But so anyway, that's kind of my overview of what I'm seeing. For people to understand the timeline is we've got the draft budget. There will be a presentation on March 12th to the county board in a work session. I'll get an opportunity to provide my own observations based on what we've heard and just our general thinking. And then the next item will be on the 2nd of April, I believe it is. There's the public hearings. So the public has an opportunity to weigh in, which is where we will weigh in publicly. That will, of course, be after our March meeting. So we'll have an opportunity to do a letter. And then the budget will be voted on, I think, in the May session. There's also a public comments on the taxes. And in this case, they're actually calling for an increase in property tax in order to kind of keep the balance and not have any draconian cuts. And they are cut, again, they do make some cuts, but on some of our issues, they are prioritizing housing and teen programs as well. So, those are the three, it was housing, teen programs, and then the environment were the 3 issues that they kind of highlighted to speak about.
Joan, could I just add a clarifying statement about the on-site solar?
Mm-hmm.
Is we were happy, and I thank Rich, because the county rules do not allow me to be part of the selection committee for awards under procurement. So Rich really ran a very, very complicated and very weighty master RFP, as you know, to cover anything and everything that we thought we could encounter or need over the next 5 years. So part of that is we have secured our own on-site solar PPA, power purchase agreement entities. But just remember that, like with everything else, these entities do not have to install the solar. They go and they model each location that we put down there, and we've already given them a fairly significant list of facilities that we are considering for on-site. If they feel that the numbers don't cut in their favor, like every other commercial entity, they have the opportunity to say, no, the numbers don't crunch our way, so we're going to reject that site. In that case, the county would either have to forego on-site solar, or the county would have to elect to include that in their capital budget. So we would own, install, operate, and maintain solar at those particular sites. So just that clarification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it just the positive, the direction at least is positive after it seemed like it had slowed and stalled due to a number of complications.
Yes, it was. Yeah, writing somebody else's contract was really, really unpleasant.
Yeah. So people have other thoughts on the budget, what we should be looking at? Have any volunteers to actually draft the letter? Rob?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe Dimitri could walk us through the major changes. If I'm looking at the right page of the budget, Dimitri, it's page 485 of the budget. It has expenses and revenues by lines of business. Is that the right? It has all the movements within all the various line items, adding up to the 25 proposed 122 million. Am I looking at the right page? And if so,
I'm getting a pop quiz on the budget. Okay, 1 second. Just give me a second to get there. You're looking at page 485, and that's the document page? Okay. Give me 1 second to get there. I think that might be what I was referring to earlier. Where I said it may look on its face as though it was a reduction, but in fact it is not.
But it's actually showing increase. The office of the director has a big cut of 29%, it looks like, but the overall change 24 to 25 is a 2% increase if I'm looking at the right table.
You know, as Joan said, the county did, after a lot of internal deliberation, they emphasized and focused on 3 kind of key core priorities. They're not the only ones, but they called them out in the manager's budget. And, you know, the other thing about the budget is there were 32 positions that were cut. Now, how many of them were filled and how many of them were unfilled, I'm not exactly sure. But clearly, cuts hit other departments, and it did not hit air. And to my knowledge, it did not hit other divisions like facilities and the Equipment Bureau that are kind of responsible for core contributions to reducing our greenhouse gas footprint. So let me just.
Yeah, and on the issue of positions, is there should still be another position in the climate policy officers that hasn't been fulfilled. I think they tried to cut it last year, but there was no mention of cutting it this year. So presumably it's still there and available for hiring to support that newly created office. The other thing that, again, it's a bit tangential to us, and I don't know the real implication is it, but the position of the chief equity officer has been eliminated, and they're rolling that into all the functions into another office. But you know, not sure the implications other than the more visual ones of taking a fairly senior level position and rolling it into, you know, kind of an office level function.
Yeah, you're right, Rob. That does look like, I apologize, from FY24, the adopted expense, and going to FY25, the proposed expense. The FY25 is around a $90,000 increase, give or take. A few
do you want to,
dollars.
maybe you or Jenna could share screen so we could walk through this? I'm sorry, I'm a recovering budget examiner. I spent about 10 years at OMB, and
I'm so sorry.
Numbers
and you're going back to it.
I saw the one-page graphic that says, you know, and thanks, Joan, for sharing all that stuff. You know, that emphasizes racial equity, environmental sustainability, investment in schools, and investment in teens. But I mean, we have a $1.62 billion budget, and say, you know, highlighting 1.2 million investment in teens. That's fine. That may be a huge percentage increase there. But how does that fit into the bigger picture and pie chart of the 1.6 billion about, you know, 600 million, which is for schools, and then we got $1 billion left, and only a small portion of that is for all the things that they're highlighting on here. So I really need to dig in the numbers here, and it'd be helpful to at least dig into your table and share your thoughts on the pluses and minuses here.
Jenna, do you have the link handy? I think Scott Sklar sent it around to everyone. Do you need it?
Joan sent the links around to everyone, I think.
Am I not sharing the right page?
You are.
Okay, so
Yep.
as you can see, the specific question, I'm sorry, I want to go back to your question again, Rob.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I wanted to see you walk us through the major puts and takes here and the
Right.
impacts that you see on your budget. This is for everything. Is a huge cut in the office of the director here. Major changes and what you think the impacts will be.
This change that you see from the FY24 adopted expense going to the FY25 proposed, that is what I was referring to previously. That is going
Okay.
to look on its face like a cut. But again, 24 included those exceptional one-time costs of the finish of the Art Bus feasibility study plus the completion, which we worked on. We'll be working on the entire fiscal year FY24 on the carbon neutral transportation master plan. So in actuality, if you take away the funds that were set aside for just those two initiatives, this is actually technically an increase in the budget, even though it looks like a decrease.
Got it.
Because this cut is not equal to, it's actually much smaller than the combined annual expenditures in FY24 from those two initiatives. In addition, and it's important, if you looked where they showed the FTEs, there were no FTEs cut from air.
Yeah.
So I think, before we kind of turn on, I'll just kind of leave with everybody with some thoughts or questions, and really would welcome any of your thoughts and input on the budget before the work session. And certainly as we draft our letter is, and based on some of the things that we've looked at the point, does this budget reflect a whole of government approach? To what extent can we tell that? Is there transparency in the budget, or do we need more transparency? Because our issues, again, really are all of government, and they reflect decisions made throughout the government. And, to what extent do we have a good enough picture to say that that money is actually being spent on, efforts that would actually move towards, decarbonizing the county government? Whether it's the fleet or whether it's the, and I didn't mention the fleet, but they're making progress on sedans, but there's a lot of other vehicles in the county fleet that might want to be thinking about as well. But again, it's where's the transparency? And are we spending enough on programs that really would help advance decarbonization, and supporting, the private sector in terms of, kind of getting information out, helping, move things along, because again, county government's responsible about 4% of the county's carbon emissions. So that other 96%, are there things that the county can do to help facilitate that and push for, private sector investments that would make those advancements? So I think, from my perspective, those are some of the key issues that we should be looking at as we make our analysis and recommendations. So,
Joan, I'm going to make a couple of suggestions, which obviously C2E2 can, take or leave. I would say in terms of transparency, I would propose that the county doesn't lack transparency. It's just that budget templates do not lend themselves to easy identification, particularly when you're talking about across the entire government enterprise. Like, well, what did transportation spend? What did solid waste spend? What is, in the county of Santa Clara, for example, you know, the impacts that you have to put in each board report, mainly here, it's a fiscal impact. We had to say, does this have a sustainability impact on every single report that went to the board? I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that because it wasn't a perfect
Not a bad
tool
idea.
for tracking investments and tracking actions. But we should come up with, for lack of a better description, we should come up with a clearinghouse, you know, methodology for, number one, identifying what is truly, you know, an impact. Most of them are going to be part of the government slice of the inventory, but some of them are also going to be, you know, kind of public facing. But we do need a mechanism, first of all, for everyone in the county. They recognize that they're doing something meaningful towards the greenhouse gas inventory and our climate action goals. But I don't think we've had the opportunity to really sit down with people. And maybe this is something, quite honestly, that would be more appropriate for Bill Egger. Maybe. As you know, we had a measure early on when we did the roadmap where it was putting together a quarterly, you know, kind of directors table of just directors and deputy directors at the very top, kind of giving a top down to meet the bottom up momentum of the climate action plan being embedded throughout the county enterprise and their actions, initiatives, policies, etc. Maybe that's the place to sit there and talk to the directors, deputy directors, and say, hi, we need something that just allows for a greater accounting. Because right now it looks like it's not transparent, when really in actuality, it's just there's a lack of any kind of mechanism for tracking that money on a comprehensive basis. So talk about that.
Well, and I
ahead.
think some of the issues is, you know, what do we need to do to decarbonize, basically eliminate fossil fuel where we're using it within county operations? And then, you know, how do we track that? Because, you know, most of those expenditures get wrapped into other expense. I mean, they have to replace an HVAC system. So that's a flat cost, but you don't know whether or not that expenditure is actually going to go to a heat pump or going to replace it with a gas system. So it's having all that baseline inventory information somewhere that one can make that translation to say at the end of the day, whether it's the CIP or the budget, these expenditures are going to help us move in the direction of eliminating our use of fossil fuels, of improving our energy efficiency, and the other goals that are all wrapped into the CEP and the carbon neutrality goal.
Well, I think I know the answer to this question. Are you talking about something that just accounts for all of that after the fact, or something that has some kind of predictive,
well, I think you have
approach to it? So yeah,
you start out with where we are right now. What's the baseline? For almost any of those things, that you're going to know what the timeline is, that when you need to replace a system, when a vehicle's going to need to be replaced.
Okay.
So that should tell you and if the goal is and the policy is that each of those opportunities will be used to shift from fossil fuels to electric and allow for that transition to carbon neutral operations.
Okay. So I understand.
Yeah. And
so
just
you're
without
looking
having
at the systems and the appliances. We've got a fair, yeah. Okay, gotcha.
And the vehicles and all of that. So where do we start from, and how are we going to get to a point where we can say our operations are all going to be carbon neutral?
And the other thing that I would encourage, and it's available online now, it's fully interactive, is to encourage, when you're talking about what can we do, particularly public facing, going into the private sector, where can we make the greatest impacts, or where should we be focusing our efforts on greenhouse gas emissions? I would encourage everyone to look at the dashboards, the greenhouse gas inventory dashboards. They are operational and available now. There's 2 of them, one for community-wide, one for government operations. It is a detailed, highly granular breakdown of emission sourcing and sources, like the county has never, kind of shared before or even broken down. So for example, if you look at transportation, transportation isn't simply, hi, this is your transportation. It'll be, hi, this is your government transportation, and it'll break out art bus from school buses, from regular fleet, from heavy duty fleet. When you go into the public sector, it will break down, it will carve out pass-through emissions, which obviously we have less control over, to WMATA, to, art bus, to personal vehicle traffic. So you have enough detail there to really say, okay, what are the areas that we can really actually control or impact directly, and what is their impact in the inventory?
Mhm. Okay. Why don't we turn to CEP implementation and roadmap and just kind of walk through some of the highlights.
Has everyone memorized that huge that huge document? It's very detailed. Are there any particular areas? The one thing that I did want to, just by way of introducing, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look at it. It's the CEP years 1 through 2, which was 22 and 23, matrix on progress made. It's highly detailed. It is going to give you, going from the far left, what the relative section is that it impacts in the CEP itself. If you go down, you'll also find at the bottom equity lens, because that wasn't a separate sector in the CEP, but the board directed it as a lens in 2019 that we had to embed to the greatest extent possible in all of our programs, projects, and initiatives and policies. It will go through the action, and originally when we developed the CEP in years 1 through 2, there were 61 identified actions. We actually wound up achieving 88. So there were 27 new additional over the course of the 2 years. That's between opportunity, mainly the opportunity and the drive, whether it comes from C2E2 or from the another department, or whether it comes from the public at large. So there were 27 additional new ones added on. Out of the original 61, there were several of them, which you're going to see in the far right-hand corner. I tried to make it easy to identify by putting in bold red type on new, both in the left-hand margin for brand new initiatives, and in the far right-hand column, showing where original measures that we had identified expanded over time and became deeper and broader. There was one that we had moved to years 3 through 5. And I believe, if I remember correctly, that was the update to a permanent EVSE rate ordinance. Away from the temporary one that we have to replace the temporary rate ordinance that we have for electric vehicle charging now. And the other one, which we've touched upon a little bit earlier, was the creation of that directors table. It seemed a little awkward for DES to have their director and also be driving that conversation among all the directors. And it seemed to us that that was better suited for Bill Egger coming out of the county manager's office. So that got shifted to him.
I'll just note that I just shared the dashboards and then
Yeah.
the CEP 1 through 2 year in the chat.
And then you're going to see who leads it, who are the supporting staff. You're going to see a column that shows all the notes of the cross leveraging and the collaboration with other county departments on initiatives. And some of the initiatives, a couple of them, you're going to see they're actually led by other departments and we actively support. And it gives the role. And then it really gives you an idea in each sector what has been done in great detail. And it was actually from a quarterly briefing that we gave board members Matt DiFerente and Takis Karantonis on all things energy and climate. And Matt DiFerente said, it would really help. I know you've got, documents over here and, charts over there and, Excel sheets over here. And he said, but it would be really great if you captured all of that performance and the roadmap in one document. So that gave birth to this. And we're going to actually keep this format and maintain it because we even find it as a useful reference document for ourselves. And I don't know, again, it's a pretty weighty document. There is a legend at the bottom. So you'll see this column early on, I think it's C or D, where you'll see check marks. Those are actions that have been completed or milestones that have been met. Some of these initiatives, not surprisingly, get done in 2 years. And then some of them you set a milestone and it's a progressive rollout of the entire initiative over 5 years or maybe even over 10 years. And then there are a couple of other, in those odd cases where there was a shift to Bill Egger's office or whether there was a push to put that in year 3 through 5. You're just going to see a legend there that'll explain those kind of icons.
So what would you identify as the key accomplishments for the first 2 years of the CEP, and to what extent can we kind of directly tie that to impacts in reducing carbon emissions and improving energy efficiency and some of the other measures that we kind of look to?
I think that some of them are going to be hard actions like the Maplewood and the 100% of government operations in renewable energy.
Yeah.
There's also another dashboard, by the way, that's a comparative dashboard that I don't think is publicly available because we don't want to, it compares us to other jurisdictions regionally and where we stand in a whole host of areas. But if you looked at the renewable energy, a lot of regional jurisdictions are achieving clean energy by buying credits. RECs from Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
And we get back, I'm not shaming them, I'm just saying, what it is, because this has several applications, as you know, from how I bring it up ad nauseum. The statewide definition memorialized in legislation in Virginia has a definition of clean energy and renewable energy specifically. That is not necessarily what Arlington follows, and probably a lot of other jurisdictions. It includes things like natural gas, it includes biomass that gets processed predominantly through coal-fired plants in North Carolina. So, we have a small share of those RECs that have, been purchased over time. I think, Rich, you started purchasing them probably at least a decade ago, probably even before that. But that's what you're buying when you buy Dominion RECs right now, because they're consistent with the state definition. So I would say it's that. I would say that it was even if it's not the heavy duty equipment, and we're looking at obviously police vehicles now, that's going to be a big focus in years 3 through 5. But I would say it's the conversion of the fleet. Our goal was to get to 40% by the end of FY24. We're at 56% now. With the purchases that are planned for FY25, we're going to be at 61%. That's significantly in advance of anyone regionally. I would say the decarbonization tool for the county facilities, before that tool, and I have to say there's been a changeover in personnel at facilities, and the prior people, I liked them. They were perfectly fine people, but they were less bought into the role of facilities in the CEP. And the group that we have now is really great. They work continuously and just about every single day with Stephen Burr, and they've actively embraced the tool and trained on how to use it themselves. So I think that was a major accomplishment. I think that the carbon neutral transportation master plan, when you see it, is a really great blueprint. The first section, it's in 3 main sections. And it's a plan with actions for stimulating greater uptake in multimodalism. The second one is a strategic plan for siting and planning and installing EVSE, and how you do it in a place like Arlington where right-of-way constraints, where 71% of your population lives in multifamily and condo buildings. And most of those are pre-existing buildings, obviously. They do not have a great deal of EVSE, if any, and the cost of retrofitting those buildings is prohibitively expensive from the viewpoint of a condominium association or a building owner. So we have a challenge to what do we do with demand and supply and the delta between the two. So I think that's going to be critical. I think that the pushing of starting to convert the school bus fleet to electric buses was very important because schools just simply doesn't have, according to them, they may have the will, but they don't have the funding or the manpower to really do all that work with the federal grants and the state grants. So are the Equipment Bureau and Air and Facilities have been working as a team to do that for them. And I think the Green Building Bonus Density Incentive Program has been highly successful in, our impact in the private sector. And I do want to let you know, while I still can't talk about it, we've gotten a little bit closer. We're moving through the process. All of our 2x2s are occurring this week. On the upgrade to the Green Building Incentive Program. So we're hoping to be able to soon socialize that with C2E2 and the Energy Committee.
Good.
And those are immediate. If you see, Joan, a lot of them take, there are some things that I think don't scream greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but we spent an enormous amount of time in the past 2 years really forging different relationships individually with the separate governments in the Northern Virginia region. We've really struck a much, much stronger partnership with Loudoun, a brand new, really dynamic relationship with Prince William. Obviously, we're working closely with Fairfax and with Falls Church. And really, I think that we have to move more and more and more towards aggregation of local governments, not just in Nova, but around the state. I think local governments cheat themselves by not aggregating and not forming, a focused initiative, an alliance, and a single voice of local governments. They cheat themselves. I think we could be doing, I'm sorry, and I think we could be doing a little bit more with the legislature. We talk about what could be the kind of key things. Reggie is obviously a key thing. And we worked very hard over the past 2 years to try and keep the state into Reggie in a number of different ways. But I think that the state also needs to revisit the definition of renewable energy. It's going to continue to frustrate everybody's greenhouse gas emissions goals if your grid is being powered by energy sources that aren't renewable energy. Let's put it that way.
Or if we can find a way of aggregating without having to go through Dominion.
Yes, and we do have that final report, and I've got a call set up later this week with the county attorney, because even though we developed the scope and everything, the actual analysis is being contracted out of and controlled by the CAO.
Is that almost done, or has it got started? Where do we stand on that study?
I would say that it's 90% done. They did do a very, very deep and fulsome analysis. I found it to be too much like a technical memorandum. So we asked them to go back and restructure it for really a public-facing document, and one that could be easily read by others in the county and the board, and digested. You didn't need a You didn't need to be Lawrence Tribe, Doug, in order to understand it. And there's one piece that I asked the county attorney if we could just go back to the well a third time and ask them to be succinct, but to really kind of detail pros and cons of one particular aspect.
Mm-hmm. Just without going into detail, is it at least somewhat optimistic that there's a pathway?
I have some concerns. I think that the county attorney's office has some concerns. I think that we do have an identification of, again, things that we should look at for trying to make changes. And the problem with a lot of Virginia law, not just in this instance, but in a lot of them, is that we're finding that laws dealing with the same subject matter get adopted over a period of 10, 15, 20 years. And one deals with a little piece of, or this issue, and another one deals, and there's no kind of comprehensive omnibus law like you had with the VCEA that really captures a particular subject, brings it up to date, is comprehensive, and can be interpreted. There can be inconsistencies from one vintage law to another vintage law on the same subject, and there are generally really gaps, or there's just ambiguities where it's really incapable of having a single interpretation. We find that over and over and over again, particularly, during the legislative sessions.
Actually, shifting to another question, I know there were a number of action items in the CEP roadmap related. One was what they called energy ambassadors, which on the notations indicated that there were actually some, kind of funding issues related to moving forward. Related to that was actually more engagement with partners within the community that could help kind of spread information and help facilitate kind of more broadly meeting the county's carbon neutrality goal. And then the third element within there are probably a few more, but those, I think also, one is the Green Homes Choice Program, and the fact that it's being looked at and revamped, and also suggesting that that's the way it's structured. At least it's fairly intense, but what's the balance between, that kind of personal assistance versus more generic, broad information that's left for people to find. And then I think there's also a number, just talking about website updates and things like that to make information more available, but pulling all that together, are we making progress that we really have that public engagement that's going to be necessary in order to get transition in the private sector?
The simple answer is yes. Jenna has been really, and I encourage people to read the monthly newsletter. And we are going to be starting to put, I think we spoke about it at the Energy Committee meeting because John Bloom raised a question about it. But Doug, if you'll remember, where we talked about sponsored content as well. There's a lot of information that is available on the AIR website. Jen has been doing a huge, massive expansion as we get these resources and tools put on there. Real quickly with Green Home Choice. Green Home Choice was a great program, but it was very, very time and resource intensive on staff, and it generally pulled in around 20, maybe 25 homes a year. So what we're looking to do is two things. Number one, automate it so that we have far more, not stuff where people have to read a manual, but we're looking to update a series of videos that AIR had actually put together, I think, during the Obama stimulus, and update those for electrification. As we've all noted several times in this group and in the Energy Committee, electrification of your home systems is really not as easy and straightforward as people would like, and they don't understand what it means and how to do it, and a little training or knowledge in advance. So we're looking to put those on videos because people will watch videos and they're easy to do. The other thing we're looking to do with Green Home Choice is really look at the multifamily and renter section and what we can be doing with multifamily buildings to incite or instill building owners and condominium owners to go more green or to have more green practices in their buildings. And that would be with the building, but it would also be with the choices people make inside their individual, apartments and condos. So that we've been moving forward with slowly, but it's a big shift and we have to do a lot of community surveys and whatnot that are already in play. The other thing that's a part of that is the possibility of, we looked heavily at green leases. They tend to also sound great, but not be very productive. So we're looking at the possibility more of green mortgages and seeing if we can push those to a greater outcome. And with the ambassadors and with the, kind of concierge advice, this is something that all of the NOVA jurisdictions under the CPRG, as well as jurisdictions in Maryland and DC, obviously is included, is we're looking at putting together a kind of centralized concierge service for people that, you can really call in. You can call in about a variety of different, a whole host, very extensive list of whether it's cars, EVs, whether it's your home, whether it's transportation related, whether it's building related, whether it's waste related, whether it's your own personal greenhouse gas, inventory footprint. So we're moving towards that. And actually this morning, as part of my discussion, my meeting with the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, we talked about something that actually was raised recently by a very astute member of our board, which is really focusing on using the school system as a conduit and a platform really for climate and energy education. And some exciting ideas came out of the discussion with FACTS this morning. So we're looking forward to doing more of that in the next couple of years. But has work already started on all of that? Yes, absolutely. We're just trying to actually, in all things, kind of say, how can we just maximize the outcomes? Because we're putting too much time and energy and money for these kind of small incremental returns. And we're looking for ways of changing process or changing delivery of programs that really expands the, not just outputs, but real outcomes.
Okay. Great, thank you. Appreciate that, Demetra. Did anybody have any additional questions or comments on CEP implementation roadmap?
What's a green mortgage?
Green mortgage, or where, how people will have a mortgage limit that a bank is willing to extend to them, and they're looking at, various homes. I'm one of those people that kind of watches a couple of those shows on HGTV, and people will actually buy a home that is under what their credit limit is because they're going to have to do improvements on the house. So they take the full amount, they buy a house that has a list price less than that amount, so they've got a buffer of extra money to do improvements. And we're looking at working possibly with banks that we can entice them to maybe promote green mortgages, where people are going to say, well, I want the custom cabinetry, I want the, marble countertops, the waterfall countertop and an island in the kitchen, that they would also at the same time say, hey, while you're doing that, why don't you think of a convection oven,
And I'm just
And I think
curious,
there's some
is this
programs.
related to, but just curious if this is, if you're like the relationship to the impending announcements for the National Clean Investment Fund and the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator.
No, but can you please give me a link to that? Because my main job lately is discovering, revealing money sources coming out of the federal government and opportunities. So that would be great. What's the agency running that one, Jonathan?
So those are the two. So there were three big programs in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The first one was Solar for All, but The other
Oh, you're
two,
talking about the greenbacks.
right, the green, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
it's basically the two green bank initiatives.
We are, and I use the royal we because Rich has been doing most of the work here.
Well, I saw him on
yeah.
the call like 2 days ago. Yes,
Yeah.
last week. So.
Oh, so you were on that call. Okay, so you know when they're coming out with the macro announcements for the main awards. Rich has already been very timely in setting up early what would be a local agency for localized administration of those funds. The Coalition for Green Capital, for example, is who we've been working with. And they're very, very large. So you really want a localized administrator. So Rich has already set up that. So we're just waiting to hear the announcement of the kind of overarching awards.
Right.
And
Okay,
Solar
great.
for All, I'm sorry.
Okay, go on.
Real quick, Solar for All has had some hiccups in its launch. I know that NVRC has been trying to move that and they're a little frustrated at this point.
In its launch, I mean, they haven't made any announcements yet, so I'm not sure.
That's the hiccup. They were supposed to launch, I think, what, last October or November?
No, they were going to, the applications were due back then and from the states, and then the EPA has always said that I think that they were going to announce in March. So, because I was talking with Virginia Energy and a lot of other states, and they're all sitting on pins and needles because some of the states governments think that like a nonprofit's going to take their Solar for All program away from the state government. But
interesting. NVRC is really the key. They're trying to, organize and be the main administrator for that program in Northern Virginia.
Okay. Well, I'm assuming they're working with Virginia Energy because maybe not. Okay.
No, they are. They are.
Great, thanks. And now we can turn because Susan has now joined us and we're extremely happy to have her here. She's going to kind of talk a little bit about, her background, where she's coming from, what kind of priorities she might have. But otherwise, this is an opportunity for us to have a discussion about, some of what the priorities we are and where we think things are going or should be going. So thank you very much for coming, Susan.
Absolutely. And thank you all for your service. I always love watching your meetings. Even before I got to officially be a liaison, there's so much incredible talent in our community. And it's just a privilege to spend time with you all. I'm still fighting a little cold, so apologies if I start hacking. But yeah, so I think by way of background, my professional training was in mechanical engineering with a focus on renewables and materials a very long time ago, and then life takes all of its turns. But I've really had just a delightful career path of being able to bring together kind of land use and green building with affordable housing and sort of community development in a bunch of different places. In the district, working with Green Home and Green Spaces when we were doing the Green Building Code there in the 90s. And then with schools there, trying to kind of unlock the real estate and get things working and efficient, which later became the renovation of all the DC public schools. Here in Arlington, I had the privilege of leading Affordable Homes and Communities, or AHC, when they had a leadership change during COVID. And we had lots of opportunities to really focus on solar deployment. And Joan was there Saturday when they moved a project forward that got over 75% on the C2E2 scorecard, even before the energy model's in. So it was very exciting. And what else? I have 2 kids in APS schools. And in terms of my work on the board, I would say there's 3 big areas I'm focused on. One is really making sure that we are investing in transparency and efficiency and just like really good government so that the great talent we have inside and the great talent we have outside really unite to make our every dollar go farther and faster, in particular for the climate. Secondly, a real focus on housing and planning to make sure that we are taking care of needs across the whole community and across all the life stages for the next many decades. And then third is a real focus on community connection, particularly for our young people. And I would say that's like 15 to 24-year-olds, many of whom have had a great deal of disconnection through COVID and who are having considerable climate anxiety that is well placed and just need to be connected and tapped for their leadership in the community. So I'm 2 months in, and tomorrow we get to set the tax rate. So welcome all sorts of encouragement or feedback on that. I don't know if anyone else tuned in over the weekend, but the county manager did present a baseline budget that balances and then a proposal for some additional increase in the tax rate to support climate and to support youth and teen programming in particular, as well as a few other things, including housing, which has an element as well. So would love to hear thoughts on that and sort of feedback on how things are going with your service and with the county. But mostly I'm just really excited about being your liaison this year and figuring out how we can keep moving things forward. I think Joan and several of you got to spend a lot of time orienting me to buses before I was even in the seat. So I think Takas passed me in the hallway today and he said, yeah, you take all the easy issues. You got buses before you started. We had legislative stuff the first week. And now we're into budget funds. But I'll take questions or just thoughts, from here. Or if you guys haven't seen the budget stuff, I have that. I can run through the initial proposal and y'all can say if there's anything that you think is valuable or we could cut out.
Susan,
Yeah,
I'll just make you aware of an issue that you may already know or maybe not, and it has to do with an ordinance from 1979 that allowed for a real estate tax exemption for the value of solar equipment on buildings, residential and commercial. And that ordinance had a whole bunch of flaws with it, and the county attorney's office has redrafted an ordinance that Demetra and her air team are writing the background papers on, I believe now, and hopefully those will go to the board soon. And I don't know if you're familiar with this. I can explain a little bit more, or Demetra can. But we're excited because it's going to give an incentive for particularly residential homeowners to install solar equipment. And we think this incentive is long overdue and should send a good message to the community that the county cares and supports residential solar.
great. Oh, and I've skipped a chapter, Joan. You got to remind me. I did spend some time working at Gensler, kind of standing up their green building coordination across the Mid-Atlantic and partnering with their global team. So I remember working on a lot of those programs to try to get solar incentives in on the commercial buildings. So kind of an odd duck that I have a lot of experiences that go around the whole real estate community. But excited to kind of push this forward here in Arlington.
So, yeah, just actually no. In addition, I think Virginia code would actually permit using tax kind of breaks or similar to the solar for energy efficiency upgrades, and whether that's something to look into is again kind of an added incentive to get people to electrify and improve energy efficiency in their homes.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Great. I think the other piece, I just left a meeting with several of the schools advocates. And I know you guys have spent some time on Career Center and other issues, but I think that continued leadership, both in leveraging the schools, connecting with the kids, to champion the climate efforts, and also helping us, kind of really focus as a bunch of the schools need refresh and renovation to make sure that we don't continue to lose ground on the energy commitments on the school side. So I think the Career Center was a tough one, but
Yeah, kind of frustrating on our end because they didn't go as far as they could have, should have.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, kind of what's your thought in terms of that? Because it's county facilities would frankly probably shouldn't be any excuse in going in the direction they need to, but also, the more challenging, but where do we get the private sector to go in the same direction? Because every project we look at, other than the Goodwill project and the Amazon project, incorporate gas within their systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've been doing so far of just making sure to raise the question every time. I don't know if there's any more kind of upfront investment in integrated design that we could do to make sure those energy models are happening soon enough. It sounds like sometimes the owners haven't been eager to share them with you or share all of the iterations with you.
Actually, we get most of them. The Goodwill, well, they were using Earthcraft, and again, it's a different in there. They're actually it's an expedited process because they have some funding grants that they have to put in for.
Right.
So they thought they were going to have them by the end of March because they needed it for the grant programs. But usually we get them. Usually what we see is a baseline design and some. Actually, usually they have a pathway to all electric, but then the sense is that they're not actually going to take that pathway. So that's the question is, you're defining the pathway. And it's, probably a change from when we first started looking at this a couple of years ago, where they're just what was saying, especially with the very large prize that, well, we just really can't do all electric.
And now they can imagine it, but they're not doing
it. Now they can imagine it, but they're still not opting in that direction. And they use, so while the modeling says that if we use gas auxiliary for the HVAC system instead of electric, we'll reduce, we're actually using less carbon emissions because they're looking at the current greenhouse gas incorporated in the electric system.
Right.
As opposed to what it would be in the future if you've got all renewable energy.
Right.
Jonathan?
And I have not been on top of these things as I used to be, but and so I don't know, Joan, you might be able to correct me, but in the SPRC process, they don't, right? They don't make it. It's not a priority upfront that when they present to the SPRC process that they already are expected to present on their climate issues, their energy efficiency issues, their clean energy issues, and it isn't as like they're very much focused on the architectural aesthetics, and that's great, but if I don't know that a action of the county board or simply a request from the county board or simply from one or more county board members to say, hey, when these SPRC processes begin, we think it would be of extraordinary value to not it be an afterthought to talk about these things, but actually a core component of it. And so, just as a bully pulpit.
Yeah.
And maybe even pushing even further to that is that before when they submit their design, their proposals to start with, that they have some sort of narrative of how they're going to achieve the county's carbon neutrality goals, and the county could spell that out, so it forces them at the beginning to think about this and hopefully design with those goals in mind. Kevin?
Hey, sorry, I couldn't find my raise my hand feature, but I just want to give you a quick heads up. I come from CPHD and the site planning team back in the day when I first started with the county. And unless they change things, there is a set way in which they cover, the site plan team covers site plan projects. And I believe it's the second or third agenda or second or third meeting agenda. It's just by rote, it's environmental issues. So it's at that point in time that you just want to find out when that meeting is going to be held and make sure you make it to that meeting. But again, check with Aaron Schreiber and team, but I believe that to be the case unless they've changed it. Thanks.
Well, yeah, except the problem is usually there's only 2 SPRCs, and if there are 3, they're usually going over the same stuff that they went over on the first SPRC. So they really tend to cram in a lot of stuff on that second SPRC. It's the landscaping, it's the traffic, it's environmental issues. For example, on the Goodwill project, they spent almost all of the time at the second SPRC meeting talking about traffic flow around the building. And, in less than 5 minutes, probably, talking about green or sustainability components and some of the other components. So, and you get this pretty typically is that they just, the way they're structured, you spend more time on form and use of the building and less time on some of the community benefits and things that most of the commissions are there and care about most.
I think Kevin had his hand up next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Susan. My view of the site plan process is lots of times 2 dynamics occur. One is the input that C2E2 would like to have when it comes in. Too many parts of the building have already been negotiated and set, and it's kind of like too late to actually have the impact we need. So setting it for the third meeting, if there is going to be a third meeting, is maybe too late. And then the other related dynamic is too often there's trade-offs about what benefits the county, et cetera, in each of these site plans, and we end up getting traded off as being a very expensive fix. And there's other things that can be done to satisfy the county will be better for the developers. And I think what ends up happening is the different initiatives, different goals of the county get all played against each other on all these site plans. And that dynamic, we need to figure out. I don't have a solution, but it's a problem I've seen in every single site plan review, is that the question is which goal of the county is just going to get a nod that, oh, we thought about it, but we're not actually doing anything, and which ones are actually going to be serious gets from the developers as part of getting site plan approval. And I just know what I've seen is the C2E2 view, the climate change view, which is existential, is one that gets traded off all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Think I'm
there's a
exaggerating,
couple
Joan, or do you think that's a fair
pieces
assessment?
in that, one is
Sure.
a process question. Are you guys in the first SPRC meeting typically? Okay. So
Yes.
you're there to
Generally, we try
catch it.
to,
And
except
is
when
it is it
occasionally they
pre-baked by
schedule on the
then?
CPE.
Is like his first meeting too late? Is that part of what you're saying, Kevin? Is like the trade-offs have been happening behind the door?
I'm still okay. I'm not on mute. I get secondhand a lot of these, so in some of my experience was older experience, and some of it was on historic preservation, which had a worse problem. But I understand why most people rate that below other county priorities. But I do know that who gets in first and what does the county staff really view as their priorities, in my mind, ends up becoming the winners in the whole process of which priorities are going to get reflected in the site plan approval at the end. And I would say what staff's willing to trade off probably is the most important issue. But beyond that, the timing of the process always seems to affect things. Whoever's coming in late with their substantive comments is not going to win out.
Mark.
Yeah, this is Mark Greenwood. The other piece of this that I think is really essential, we can talk about things that probably would make the SPRC process work better, but I think it's really important to recognize the role of the green building incentive policy, because that is policy and it guides an awful lot of the things that go through SPRC. And so making sure that that policy is as strong as it can be on energy, but also two other topics that I know I care about a lot, which is stormwater and excessive heat, sometimes called the heat island, but it doesn't have to be just an island. It can be heat from a lot of sources. And at this point, we don't really have a culture of building in concern about those excessive heat issues when people pick building materials, when they design the building, when they think about things like green roofs and so on and so forth. And so having as much of those kinds of signals, incentives as part of that GVIP policy would be a very important step. And I know Demetra and her staff are looking at some of these issues and hope we can move forward on some of that.
Yeah, and I see the exclamation point, Demetra. I mean, I think continuing to advise on where there are places we could incent some pilots and demonstration projects, whether it's the materials types, and certainly as we update the incentive policy to actually update it so that it's not quite as 2000 as it is right now. But I also, I don't know if any other jurisdictions are, like, is there a way, like when green buildings, when LEED was first brand new and you had the gold sign was really kind of powerful and the platinum sign was super powerful. It's kind of waned a little bit in some ways, but is there some sort of, energy grade, stormwater grade, good citizen award ranking we could do, that like gives you a little sticker on the door or something like that? At least for multifamily, I think that would potentially like speak volumes to young renters. So I don't know. I think I'm open to ideas like that. And certainly from a board perspective, I think you saw in the bus conversation, and in even like our stormwater sewage plant conversation this week, like there's a little bit more unity on the board right now, I would say, of moving climate fairly high the list of priorities. So I think that I will try to practice, and certainly Takas and Maureen and Matt and Libby to a great extent, like just asking the question every time of staff will help staff elevate it as well, because that you're going to get asked the staff, and then that helps the developers as well. I mean, that talking with the developers, they're like, yeah, we noticed when you ask the question twice in a row that you're going to keep asking it. So those are small ways we can do it, but I think really kind of continuing to look across the country and the globe, like who's pushing the envelope and can we borrow and steal that, so that we can really highlight that. Yeah, and certainly on the heat resilience. I mean, I think if you look at our older and aging affordable housing properties, whether they're market rate or they're committed affordable, I mean, and the Serrano is a perfect one, actually. Like, it had a lot of challenges. That was right when I went in at HC. Part of it was built in the 60s, and it has gigantic windows that are west facing. And so like the heat gain is just profound in that building, and the loss too in the winter. And so kind of maybe even really focusing on, from a design perspective, but a grants perspective, could we take a couple of those multifamily buildings. Some of them are aging condos. Some of them are aging market rate rentals along Langston, for instance. And some of them are the committed affordable, where they're aging out. We did a lot of building in the 60s and 70s, and so they're hitting that moment, and they had some challenges, shall we say, in terms of their envelope design.
Majdi?
Yes, good evening, Majdi Shamali, Commission member. I just wanted to say, as a county, we have to decide whether we are serious about the goals in the community energy plan or not. And if we are serious, then the buildings that we have been approving are not going to get us there. And so I think that's the first fork in the road.
Yeah.
And I think, developers do pay a little attention to that is that, at least most of them are participating in the green building incentive policy. Only the ones recently, only the Sunrise project didn't, which is a shame because again, they're serving a vulnerable population where those things should make a difference. And again, looking at these things as trade-off, and they could say, well, we're building an assisted living facility. The county needs that. Therefore, we don't see a reason to push the envelope very hard. So it's, how do we stop getting those trade-offs being made? And I've heard, there's things as, the developers the best, well, you just pay into the affordable housing fund and don't go to any extent on these other issues, especially on sustainability. Demetra?
Yeah, if I could just add quickly, I'm not going to assume the worst, but we're going to be tracking it very closely, is that the governor issued an executive order, a number of executive orders directing a long list of state agencies to quote unquote reduce their codes by at least 25%. And that includes the building code, the state building code. So that's a bit of a
25% of what, like pages?
Yeah, well, that's what we're waiting to see. The explanation is that there's a belief that we are regulation heavy, and in a number of different areas, including the building code. He thinks that it could be more streamlined and have a lighter touch. What form that takes, we're tracking that. But I think if I remember correctly, Rich, isn't it by the end of this calendar year?
I believe so, but I'd have to double check on that.
I think there was one piece of legislation that started out as a stretch code legislation, and ultimately the language ended up to being they can't change the codes until
yes,
basically the governor can't arbitrarily change the codes. It has to go through the regular process. So hopefully that will make it through both houses, and that might undercut that effort.
It would have been nice to be able to do reach codes, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Got to work on that for next year.
My default position dealing with the Commonwealth is let's do local incentives and like let them figure their stuff out. Like it's so painful right now. So we have to keep advocating, but I don't think we can wait. It's bonkers.
Yeah. Well, and it's, how can we get really creative with tax incentives and other opportunities to make it appealing and attractive, or just make it clear that, the county board expects that these projects will meet at least these minimum standards that are consistent with our codes. And I think, and I've never got a straight answer on this, is, to what extent the county board can just not approve a project because they don't like what it's offering. If they don't think the sustainability elements go as far as they should, can they
I think
just
you
say,
can do it once, but you might not be able to do it too many times if you want them to get built. So, and I think that there is there's a little bit of the reality too of the marketplace right now that I think on multifamily and apartment buildings, because the values are holding better, you have a little bit more wiggle room and a little bit more moral authority. On the office side, I think aside from like the handful of like super class A, fanciest headquarters in the land that may get built in the next couple of years, I think that the game is going to be about how do you help solve the retrofit problem, in bringing those incentives in, bringing the tax credits in, making the buildings both more efficient and sexier, and then trying to capture the embodied carbon as they get reused.
Right, and how you get that adaptive reuse.
Yeah. Because I think I can hear AED screaming from afar, that the economic development team, like, it probably is not the year to say, like, no, you can't, build your office, or you can't redo your office building and occupy it unless it's completely carbon neutral. Because it's not very carbon neutral right now while it's empty and heated either. And it's not very revenue positive either. So I suspect the push Dimitri's doing on multifamily, both existing and I think there will continue to be new multifamily and hotels going in. But on office, we may need to go just a little bit gently.
Well, we had a presentation last month from an associate at Redbrook that's doing the Douglas in Annapolis, and actually Eco Action Arlington just did a webinar with them as well. So it's online, you can watch it. But basically he was saying and they're a for-profit, they're investing in these projects for the long term.
If they're going to hold them,
building it to net zero carbon standards, and they're trying to get certification on that. They're doing wonderful things. But he made the point is that they think this is their best financial interest, because that's what their clients are looking for. That's where you have to future-proof it, because you've got carbon tax coming, you've got other, things going on that are going to require expensive retrofits in the future if you don't address it to begin with. And it's actually not really much more expensive than building to code.
Right. We've got Kevin and Joe.
Yeah, I just, two thoughts. One, Joe made one of them. That is, it's really easy for developers to fall back on the way they've always done things and said, we can't do anything different, even if it's actually not going to be a cost impact on them or a marginal cost impact on them. And we need to push harder even on the commercial end. And then I think on some projects, I think it's worthwhile thinking, do we need to lock in a bad solution? Because once you renovate that building, you're stuck with that renovation forever, because they're trying to do it right now in a time where they have all the leverage, because we're going to get any economic development. We have to let them do it. I mean, Arlington County is a rich county, and I know we do want to have economic development here, but I don't know that economic development should entail necessarily a complete sacrifice of dealing with the carbon crisis. And so maybe not everything we need, but I think we can't just say we can't touch commercial and only deal with residential, because the commercial market's so tanked right now.
Yeah, I just recognizing the trade-offs for the next 18 months at least are going to still be a little gentle, but that also means that where there are tax incentives, where there is some grant funding, that is more powerful and speaks more loudly to owners than other times, because they can't make the projects go around with the regular financing, right? So you look at the Marriott and Keybridge, for instance, like
and apparently some of these projects are easier to finance if they're going for highly sustainable.
Exactly.
And so there's people that want to invest for their ESG portfolios. So all sorts of good reasons for them to do so, but adding on the advantage of additional incentives and really expecting them and showing them where they can take advantage of the IRA.
Yeah, exactly. So Demetra, like you're doing on the residential and multifamily side, like are there more easy buttons or kind of regional, easy buttons that we can have available for those building owners? And I wonder about commissioning too. Like, is there a commissioning push we could do, especially while you've got a lot of buildings that aren't heavily used right now? Like, is this the time that we could go and fine tune them? Because they're not paying a high tax rate on them, but they're still paying those energy bills. Like you can't leave the building cold.
We are trying to, as I put in the chat, we have put a couple of months ago our proposal for the COG under the climate pollution reduction grant. Everybody was putting in their proposals. There's a lot of consensus, no surprise, but in our building sector, we built in a subsector for what we call distressed assets. And we're hoping, because we've been working very closely with AED for almost a year now. They informed our pilot and our education, internal education cohort for adaptive reuse. And they've got a number of buildings that they've shared with us and those buildings tend to be, not exclusively, but they were built between the 1980s and the early noughts. So they're pre the current code, which is bad enough. So there's a lot of energy inefficiency there. And you're right, the energy use intensity is through the roof. So we're hoping that this survives to the actual application for the funding. We think that there's a lot of potential there.
That's great.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment about the future housing supply stock. We're talking about the energy codes. And so I can't say anything that isn't publicly stated, but the Federal Housing Finance Agency is pondering a requirement for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac for all new construction mortgages on both multifamily and single family to meet the latest energy efficiency requirements and/or possibly the third-party equivalencies. To align with HUD and USDA's preliminary determination. So there is possibly some federal action coming through that would be essentially be able to standardize it possibly nationally. So
That would help. Appreciate you coming and talking to us, and we look forward to working with you. And feel free to come anytime, and we'll make sure we get you back on a regular basis for these discussions, because I think they're highly useful.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for all that you're doing, and feel free to reach out anytime. There's lots to do.
Yep. You'll be hearing from us.
All righty. Awesome. Take care.
Great. Thank you. So I thought maybe we can spend the last 10 minutes of trying to at least talk a little bit about the county's visioning initiative and maybe thinking more broadly as in terms of more shifting from community energy plan to climate action. But kind of give a summary. I did have an opportunity to attend the kickoff visioning event that the county's doing, this Vision 2050. And basically, they kind of had everybody write down their vision. They shared it among the people at their table. And ultimately, people came up with pretty much the same kind of vision. I mean, getting there probably is in the details, is that there was a lot of commonality in addressing climate change, shifting to all electric energy efficiency, the goals that we've been promoting, ranked high in what people were thinking, and basically thinking of a community that really meets a broad range of goals of being diverse and equitable, as well as, being green in all the dimensions of green, so biophilic as well as is moving towards carbon neutrality in that. So again, at least with that, there's a similar vision. I think it's more the question of how we get there and you know, how much time they're going to spend more on people presenting this vision. Do encourage anybody to kind of go to the website and put in your postcard, which is the way they're kind of doing it, is kind of writing back from 2050 as to what's happened. That's, you know, what's happened, or, you know, what's it like in 2050. So, but from that perspective, I think, you know, thinking about, you know, how our visions fit in with that, and then, you know, how do we actually, and how, you know, what kind of planning process the county needs in order to get there. We've tended to focus on energy, but there's a whole range of other things that really, you know, embedded carbon, you know, just the carbon in the things that we consume, in other elements. And so, you know, how to think more broadly about what the county needs to do for really addressing even more deeply than the community energy plan. I think, you know, once we get through the budget and the CIP, we'll have a little chance to kind of step back and think about some of these issues and maybe being a bit more proactive in terms of kind of presenting both our vision of the future and where we think the county needs to go next, to kind of really, because we don't have a whole lot of time to waste. So what can we do, and how do we start doing it right away instead of spending 2 years creating another plan? Mark?
Yeah, I just, so where does it go from here? The visioning sounds like it's a lot of consensus of things that people might share, but do you have a sense of what the next step of this might be?
Well, the way they talked about it, and I'm not sure what other event is, I mean, they're doing this postcarding thing, but it's really, I mean, you know, Libby talked about it. Well, we'll come up by the end of the year and we'll listen to all this and we'll create a couple of visions. Whereas, you know, my sense, what I took away from that meeting is, you know, we actually can come up with at least a high level vision. I mean, when you drill down into the details of what that looks like, say at the neighborhood level, you might get some disagreements or different ways of where you think should go and how you get there. But yeah, I don't know, you know, to me, that's the kind of frustrating part of it, is if we've got what seems to be some degree of consensus, how do we get to a place that really identifies what things the county should be prioritizing in order to help develop a community that actually reflects that vision? And that's, I think, you know, especially things that we can be thinking about this year, particularly once we get through the first half of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts of what you would like, what we would like to see? Yes, it is.
I think Majdi had the good point that we keep approving all these buildings that, and you know, despite all of our ratings and the SPRCs, and these buildings have a horizon of 40 years or more. We're locking in. You know, I'm not sure how we change the SPRC process.
Yeah, well, I think, of course, the green building incentive update is that one possibility, and coming out really strongly of here's the minimum requirements that really are going to be consistent, which is, you know, higher energy efficiency levels, all electric, and a few other key things that we think have to be in every building.
Yeah.
I think if I could just add to that, I think that's really critical because, again, the green building incentive policy is policy. And everybody in the system, in the staff, will feel a need to implement it. It's different. It's easy to look at our recommendations and say, nah. It's just
again, it's not the required policy. So
yeah,
we're always at the odds of saying, you know, this really doesn't do it, but they're part of the green building incentive policy, so they've checked that box.
Yeah. Right.
Joan, can I ask, getting back to Cindy's question about process here, is there a way to mandate the sustainability documentation before the SPRC process even starts? And if it doesn't meet some minimum threshold, that they can't go through with the SPRC process? I mean, that's a major policy change and board decision, it sounds like, but should we look into what we'd have to do to make that recommendation? I'm just not familiar. I don't know what exists, but it seems like they can submit the sustainability documentation late and kind of not do a thorough job on it, and we can still squeak by.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think, you know, again, number one, it's setting the expectations is this is what the buildings have to be. And right now, the green building incentive policy doesn't really do that. So, you know, and then expecting them to, you know, be very clear right up front how they're going to meet that. Again, you know, part of the issues and part of the reasons they actually can't, they say they can't, you know, achieve, you know, these goals for zero carbon buildings is because they haven't designed from the beginning towards the zero carbon building.
Yeah, that's my point. Can we mandate that from the start?
Right.
And change the policy to make it that. Yeah.
Yeah, or if there's some sort of incentive that, you know, kind of gets them to make sure that they're doing. Because yeah, you're right. It's once it goes into the process, they've got the design fairly well set, and they've made decisions about certain things, which then makes it harder to say put in centralized heat pump systems or even in-unit heat pump systems, which is even more of a challenge. So, you know, so yeah, definitely that's setting that, so the expectation is that they're designing up front for these building or for these things. And again, you know, as the Red Brook presentation shows, it's costs them about 5% more money over building to code. And of course, that's DC code as opposed to Virginia code, but still, it's not that much extra money for what you save in energy costs and that down the long run. So I think, you know, as we get more definition of the green building incentive policy, look really closely as to how it works at really kind of incentivizing building to the right standards to start with. Yeah. And it is kind of frustrating. And actually, one of the arguments we ran into in terms of energy efficiency when I first started getting involved with this is like, well, it's only 30% designed, so we haven't designed in all those elements that will tell us that. But they've designed in enough elements that make it hard to do certain things. So they get you coming and going. Any other comments or thoughts? Okay. Sent around the other, just kind of maybe a couple brief updates, and if anybody else has updates, we can then start to wrap up. We did have that letter that Jenna sent around on the dark skies compliance. I think Michaela had indicated she had some interest in following through on that, but again, and this might get into something that I know Doug's been looking into on green purchasing strategies and policies is, you know, are we actually, you know, do we have, you know, the right policies in place that mean that, you know, when we put in street lights and other lighting, that they're going to be dark skies compliant and address the light pollution.
Yeah, I can just report to the group that I reached out to Bill Egger, and at the EC meeting, somebody had suggested that he was working on a purchasing policy to encourage county employees in their purchasing decisions to consider green and environmental policies. And he said, yes, he's working on that. But this particular time of year with the budget stuff going on, and also sounded like a whole new computer program is going in. And maybe Demetra can briefly explain that a little bit, but it's not a good time right now. Check back in 3 months and make a push at that time for some sort of a policy on a new policy, replacement policy on purchasing and procurement for county equipment.
Yeah, Doug, really quickly, he's right. It's called PRISM, and it's basically the DNA of all of the kind of technical web-based accounting and programming and everything that we do. And Rich actually had worked on the environmentally preferred procurement. It used to be manual, and you had to take it, the paper from one department to another and find somebody in the next department. So Rich put together a system where it was automated, web-based, and where the departments had appointed somebody to really be the point person for the EPP in that department. So Bill's right. They're going through an overhaul of the PRISM system. So I would say 3 months sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. And maybe one thing we can do, maybe get some kind of presentation by staff in terms of what their policies are for lighting, what the requirements are in terms of the color of lighting, and making sure it's not going in all directions and just going in the direction where it's actually needed. Do mention, and I'll try to send it out to people, is C2E2 actually had done a white paper a number of years ago on dark sky compliance. So, again, that might be something to relook into a little bit and see where we stand, but, kind of getting some ground truth from staff might be helpful in terms of helping drive recommendations. Again, a lot of this is pretty standardized through Dark Skies Alliance or whatever the organization is in terms of setting what the standards should be.
You also might want to consider bringing Dominion into that discussion too, because, for example, I know you're making a lot of references here to the street lights, and the county owns a percentage of them. And I believe, I'll double check, but I believe the county has been pretty responsible about the type of lighting and the type of heads on the lights and everything else, the Cobras. But we don't control what Dominion does with theirs.
All right, so we'll try to follow up on that at some point. Just to update on the Solid Waste Committee, they met in January, and they basically said that they were pretty much going forward with the draft as it was presented, not really taking into our account our comments, which is kind of what we expected. They did marginally adjust the projected trash down a little bit, expecting a very small decrease in the amount of per person trash generated. So I think, we'll probably want to step back at some point before it goes to the county board to decide, what we really want to focus on. Given that they'll probably push hard to get this approved because they're actually mandated to have it updated at the end of fiscal year 2025. So. Okay, and that's about it. I will be at the county board meeting tomorrow talking about the Columbia Pike Form-Based Code. So again, kind of pushing for standards that are more in line with what we think is essential for meeting the county's carbon neutrality goals.
And you've been covering so many of these meetings, the board meeting, the budget meeting, the all hot. So we appreciate it.
Okay, yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, can do that, but hopefully as we made the transition and others are available. Again, you know, I think everybody should have an opportunity to go in front of the county board. So. Okay, anybody else have any updates or final comments?
Hey, Joan, really quickly, I want to thank you for inviting me to that event that was hosted by Sierra Club and Eco Action. And I came back the very next day and talked to Jenna immediately about Rewiring America. And it goes to show how little I know about what's going on. She's already been working with them.
Yeah, I mean, they are a host of resources, so
Yeah.
and really willing to kind of work with communities to make sure we're taking advantage of what's out there and using best practices gleaned from other communities. But yeah, encouraging you. I can send out the link to the webinar. See if you have a chance. It's worth listening to as well. Some of it you kind of got earlier with the Red Brick presentation that we had. Okay, anything else? All right, and that's it for tonight. Appreciate everybody's time, and we will meet again on March 25th. And of course, that will be in-person hybrid, so look forward to seeing everybody there. Oh, yeah, and please, you know, if somebody's interested in taking the lead on the letter for the budget, that would be appreciated, as well as just making any comments that you have before the 12th on the budget in terms of shortfalls, strengths, what we should kind of focus on in terms of both our letter and comments. That would be appreciated. Otherwise,
Joan,
I'll make up my own anyway. Pardon?
Joan, I got one quick matter. I seem to recall there was some indication that a member of this commission was interested in joining the Energy Committee, and we decided that would take a vote or some formal approval of this body if we want to go forward with that. But if we don't want to go forward with that, I don't want to put any pressure on anybody.
I think we should probably go forward with that.
So I think Rob Sandoli was interested in joining the Energy Committee, and we welcome him to join us if he would like to, and I would so move.
Second, if you want a second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Is Rob opposed? He's on mute. Okay.
Rob's excited. Thank you very much, Doug.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to the Energy Committee.
Thank you very much. Great, Rob.
Okay, and that's it. All righty, everybody.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Good night.
Nay.